good afternoon, folks. This will be a pretty truncated and quick weekly press conference, but we did want to make sure to carve out a few minutes for you folks to primarily answer questions. There is no specific topic today that we're covering, but did just want to be available to talk with the press about what's happening and all the different things that are going on. You just saw upstairs a number of abortion-related bills that had been parked over in the House by the Speaker, which is a part of the problem in terms of why we're not getting out of here on time, because it's been a pattern of behavior that everything that is not viewed as idyllic by her, I guess, has been parked over there and just tabled and tabled and tabled. And so we have this tremendous backlog of bills over there that's going to lead soon, as of tomorrow, will be costing taxpayers over $50,000 every day that we have to come back in because of her mismanagement. And that's a fact that we're now about to be living in as of tomorrow, because our statutory, between the budget gains that were played earlier this year and the ending of our session by statute, as of tomorrow, it will be costing Maine taxpayers $50,000 or more every day that we are here. And so folks have one person to blame for that at this point. In fact, I even spoke with the President of the Senate. He's not impressed with her. I'm not going to put words in his mouth. You can talk with him. But there seems to be one caucus right now that doesn't have its act together, and it's pretty clearly led by the Speaker, and it's going to cost a lot of money here, starting very soon. So we can cover any subjects that you folks wanted to cover today, and I'll leave it at that for now.
May I start with what are your thoughts about the family paid bill that just passed?
Well, I think you heard hours of debate about that issue. It was a party line vote. I think that's emblematic of what exactly has happened here. It's been extreme liberal Democrats negotiating with socialists, and that's apparently where the so-called compromise has come from. But it hasn't come from anybody meaningfully working with certainly not the Republicans. There wasn't a single Republican that voted for this, or it was even frankly at the table. It certainly wasn't the business community. The business community is all still very opposed to this. It's a new tax on employees and employers. It's going to be hitting folks in their pocketbook. And frankly, it's not as well designed as it could be. There's other models we could have looked at. We did a whole press conference on this a couple weeks ago around the different ways that we could go about doing this. Unfortunately, that apparently has all fallen on deaf ears. I'll be curious to see how the governor handles this if the bill hits her desk. Whether she decides to veto it or not, there's obviously still lingering that threat of a citizens referendum. I say bring it on. I say we can go talk with Maine people, and they're smart enough to figure out whether or not they actually want to go down this road. I think the polling that they've used is complete bogus. If they're saying that 95% of people agree that we should do something, you have a statistically flawed poll. There is no poll that's going to say 95% of people agree with one position. I don't care what it is. So that the whole thing, I think, has holes all through it. It's unfortunate that this is where we're at, but it's a sign of the times, I think, and how polarized Augusta has become. And I think one last thing I'm going to end on is that you saw, you heard testimony from Senate Democrats in particular about how much they care about creating opportunities for folks to meet with folks who are having babies and are on maternity leave and things like that. But literally just before that, 10 bills regarding abortion were either expanding abortion rights in Maine and killing more babies were pushed forward by the Senate Democrats, and at the same time killing ideas that would have been more, I would say, moderate approaches to that issue, baby boxes and the like, that were squashed by those same people that then turned around and immediately pivoted to say that they were just so gosh darn concerned about folks having more babies, and that was such a big thing we needed to get over, while simultaneously voting to kill more babies. So I really can't square that circle, but I had to include that.
May I just follow up with if there's anything in the bill that's more troubling, which is it? I mean, there are a few concerns that they had, such as how do you regulate who actually is family, including volunteering. Why not voluntary instead of mandatory?
Right.
Is there specific points that should have passed through to them?
I do think that the whole system of one size fits all for everybody is not a good way to approach this. I think, frankly, we should be looking at a more voluntary rather than mandatory approach. This is going to impact every business in the state. If you have 15 employees or less, you're still impacted by this. It's not as if they carved you out. They're just saying that you have to install something. And so it's still a mandate on every employer across the state. I think looking at what really works for Maine's different sectors of Maine's economy is important. I think having choice in that whole dynamic is important, and figuring out what's the right move to make for your business is important and shouldn't be something that's been rammed through by the government. But so I think that's probably the most concerning part of it, at least to me.
Speaking of the safe haven, you spoke in opposition of it. Could you tell us your stance on that?
Safe havens.
The safe haven baby box at hospitals.
Oh, the baby box bill.
Correct.
Yeah, so it was my colleague who's unfortunately not here this week. Her daughter's getting married, so we congratulate her and her family on that. Senator Lisa Cotton. I just felt compelled to share something on the record about that in her absence. I think what we've seen is that that's an initiative that passed previously in the legislature, different legislature, but then has kind of waned and died because the department hasn't actually moved on it as they're supposed to. They're actually in violation of the law and what the legislature directed them to go out and do and roll out this program across the state. And how familiar are you with the concept? So the idea being that there would be a system where rather than, like unfortunately the case you probably heard about in Aroostook County where a woman abandoned her child and was discovered years later, but you could leave that child in a safe place where folks, first responders and folks, medical professionals would then take care of and treat that child. That would have a silent alarm that would go off if it's ever actually used inside of the building. That way there's no sort of pressure there on the parent. They can leave the child there. And I know that was in your committee, right?
Oh, that's right,
Yeah.
judiciary.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Eric? Feel free to jump up here.
Sure. I mean, the proposal was in the Judiciary Committee, and it had a bipartisan support to move this forward. We had two Democrat House members who signed on with Republicans to try to advance this proposal, and I think it's a shame that even that, something the legislature had previously endorsed and had bipartisan support, even that fell victim to partisan politics.
Now, Mr. Breaky, Senator Breaky, sorry
Sure.
about that. One of the bills that had a few back and forth up there was 1249, and you did speak on that one.
You have to refresh my memory on the numbers.
Sure.
A lot of numbers flying around.
That one is an abortion bill that has to do with telehealth by prohibiting physicians from prescribing abortion-inducing drugs. What is your stance in that?
Yeah, so this was a bill brought forward by Representative Reagan Paul in the House of Representatives. And there were a couple of different reports. There were actually three different ought-to-pass reports with different three different variations on it. The report that I authored was I think the most moderate of all of them, and it basically would have just looked at if telehealth was the appropriate way to be have this prescribed by, particularly when we heard about some of the challenges where these prescriptions should only go out in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy, and over telehealth you can't really determine that, and there can be real ramifications for not just the unborn baby, of course, but real ramifications for the mother as far as health effects if it's not used appropriately and there isn't proper guidance. So I love telehealth. I think telehealth is great for so many things, but it's not a perfect fit for everything. And so I mean that was that bill there.
One of the things they mentioned is that is part of it is because people have busy schedules, but beyond that is that it will help people in the rural communities who are not able to get readily to a physician.
Certainly, there are arguments on all sides, and I certainly think that that's a powerful argument against the proposal. At the same time, I don't know, when we heard some of the testimony at the public hearing of what women had gone through, that they didn't fully expect, kind of the days of agony they went through as they went through this chemical abortion without a physician that they got to be, speak in person with. And it certainly seemed that perhaps telehealth is not the best approach there. But certainly, I recognize that these chemical abortion pills are widely used, and we're not talking about taking them off the market or anything. We're just talking about wanting to make sure that people have proper access to a physician when they're undergoing what's basically an in-home medical procedure.
And also, one of your remarks today had to do with coerced abortion. Mm-hmm. Can you give a little detail on that one?
Yeah. Well, actually, I presented a bill a few weeks back. It wasn't among the batch today, about trying to make sure that we have statutes in place protecting a woman's right to withdraw consent, because people sometimes change their mind. In fact, I shared remarks previously on the floor from current Congressman Cori Bush, as she shared her experience about basically being the victim of a forced abortion when she was younger, where she went into the clinic. She thought she was ready. She had got some cold feet, thought maybe I want to talk to the father, and she decided to change her mind, but they wouldn't listen to her, and they went and they performed the abortion on her over her protests as a young woman. And that's, regardless of whether people identify as pro-abortion or anti-abortion or pro-choice or pro-life. I mean, that bill that I put forward before was simultaneously a pro-choice bill and a pro-life bill, just protecting a woman's right to choose and be able to even change her mind. Now, the proposal that was in front of us today about coerced abortion, this was a proposal by Representative Amy Arata of New Gloucester, the House Assistant Republican leader. And what we ultimately landed on with this proposal in the committee was really just wanting to make sure that women who are seeking an abortion have full access to the knowledge of their rights. The fact that they do have the right to change their mind and withdraw consent, and they cannot be coerced. So we've heard stories in the committee about cases where women were pushed into having an abortion because they were threatened, if you don't, you'll lose your job or you'll lose your housing. I mean, really sometimes despicable threats from people that are frankly against the law. And so what we settled on was, let's just make sure that there are, you kind of like how you have the Department of Labor, like employee rights posters in every workplace. What if we just had in abortion facilities, you'd have a poster just so that a pregnant individual would be able to have an invisible place to know what their rights are as they're going through that process. I think that it's important that people know their rights.
So any other questions not around abortion, but and we've got a wide gamut of things happening this week.
Senator Stewart, I just wanted to go back to what you opened with. And please feel free to correct me if I phrase anything wrong. But have you been given any reason as for the delay and why bills are taking so long to go through?
Yeah, simply they're just being tabled. They're not being taken up. I mean, there's no real reason why. I mean, today's a great example of that, right? The House was supposed to start at 10 a.m. It's almost 2 o'clock before they're even going to their divided reports and actually doing reports out of committee. So, I mean, that's 4 hours. Look, we adjourn. Our statutory adjournment is in less than, it's roughly 8 hours away. Before we start costing the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money for every day that we're here. And there's no need for it. I think back to all the days, in March, April, May, we didn't do anything. Even in June this month, folks were leaving, afternoon on scheduled session days when there's dozens of bills on the table that aren't being taken up for whatever reason. Maybe that was a part of the strategy. Maybe the speaker is wheeling and dealing, but it's at the taxpayer's expense, and it's at Maine people's expense, because this is about to cost them a tremendous amount of money starting tomorrow. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's frankly, for me, it's not about the money, although it's real.
Yeah.
The system fails when you don't have an orderly discussion of issues that the public can actually participate in, can follow. And so, we came down here, for example, today, and without a specific agenda, because everything is being discussed. I mean, there are bills across the gamut. And we should do better as a legislature in organizing our work in a way that the public can follow it. The news media can report in a timely fashion, because there's all kinds of side stories relating to these issues. There's real human beings involved with a lot of these issues. And it'd be really nice, say, even on something as dry as tax reform, if there was a week when we knew that all those tax reform bills were going to be discussed by the legislature, House and Senate, and then people in the press can write about those stories, they can do the research, the advocates know what day they have to be here to show up to have the maximum impact, because there's so many people that want to have their voices heard, but they don't know when is the right day to be here, because we don't really tell them. As well as just being sensitive to the people who our legislators, electeds, and our staff here, who are just overwhelmed by this stuff. Everybody trying to do the best job they can. So it's a shame that I think it plays into a lot of other issues that that we could be addressing. We should be addressing the way our rules work. I mean, Senator Stewart put in a bill with bipartisan support. The President of the Senate supported it. I was a co-sponsor to study the legislative process. And unhappily, that get killed. And so, because this is a failing, and it goes beyond this one session, although it's particularly pronounced in this session. But I've been, this is 15 years in the legislature, going back to 1991. And this really is the worst I've seen in terms of backload of work. Some of it has to do with concept drafts. Some of it has to do with just human inertia. There's all kinds of things here at play, but we really ought to take a step back and just catch our breath after this session, say, can't we do better for the people of Maine?
Are the delays leading, you think, to maybe a repeat of what happened in March with Democrats passing the budget without, your support? And I guess any of you can take that.
Yeah. Well, we're continuing to talk in the appropriations room. In fact, we had a meeting on Juneteenth among the chairs and leads to sort of work through our differences, understand them better, and so I remain cautiously optimistic. It can change on a moment's notice, but I do think that there's both parties have their initiatives that they're important initiatives identified. I think we're sort of adding up the numbers to see what can be accommodated, to see if we can come to a vote that will get 2/3 of each chamber. But as I said in some remarks today, nuance is lost in today's politics. We've reached kind of the art of finding consensus is really not as much of a political process as it used to be.
How long more do you think this session will continue to last, I guess?
That's unclear. We don't have a budget yet, and we still have at least a couple hundred bills that are still working their way through the process, and again, dozens that are tabled in the House. I know they're taking some up now, but it's up to the majority party, and their leader is the speaker, right? And that's until they decide that they're going to work a couple late nights. I think, when I came in yesterday morning, I was still optimistic that we could be done by day's end today. Now that means you're going to have a couple long days, long nights, early mornings, but they created this situation in the fact that just sitting on things and waiting on things and dragging their heels. It's not like any of this stuff should be a surprise really to anybody. At this point, I'm of the mindset that whatever we haven't finished in terms of workload, you can carry it over and deal with it in January, but you know, if something still isn't ironed out and the details still aren't ironed out, that means there's probably a problem with the bill, and now there's gonna be some rapid dash at the last second to hammer it through, and that's where you get bad policy from. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing it passed in the Senate, I think, with paid family medical leave. They were under the gun to do something. This is the best compromise. So again, so-called compromise. I don't know who, between the liberals and the socialists. Great, what a compromise that is. That's the best they could do in this moment. And it doesn't need to work that way. There are things that we can do, changes we can make. A reorganization of this place is, I think, paramount to our future if we're going to actually move forward here in a meaningful way as a state. But we can take one last question and then we got to wrap for the day. All good?
You mentioned the budget. I was just wondering how that's going. I know the last time it was kind of along party lines, Democrat side. Just any update?
Yeah, it wasn't kind of. It was entirely party lines last time. They passed it entirely on a majority basis, and then basically made as Senator Bennett refers to it, an extra constitutional move to adjourn us and then bring us right back in with everything still in place. That didn't involve any input from us. I think this time around, I'm much more optimistic that we still have a path forward that can produce an outcome that garners 2/3 support. That's still going to require both sides, I think, coming together and giving a little bit in order to get there. But I do think that's still a possibility here. You know, maybe later today. Who knows? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.